So obviously this is a topic of interest. Either while somebody wants money, or you want to take money from somebody, or you have another interest in that. So, welcome. Welcome to a panel that is about, that we gave the provocative title, Investing in Therapies or Molecules. Is that dichotomy at all? And patients versus patents. Obviously, there's some tension in the field and in the topic. Maybe we'll raise the question of extracting capital, but also what capital can do. I work on the assumption that anything that will be going into society needs a working economic model. But these can be different, obviously. Yeah? And this is the kind of stuff we will talk about today in the next 45 minutes. There is a little other dimension that we already covered in the symposium with Stefan. Could some kind of altered states of consciousness or psychedelic experience maybe have a positive effect on the development of leaders, business leaders and other leaders? We can raise it again, but I think we'll cover the whole field. So to make it quick and also more authentic for you, I will ask the panelists to really quickly self-introduce yourself. And maybe with one sentence say, why are you in the field? Why are you sitting here?
Hello, everybody. My name is Simeon. I am in the field because I absolutely love it. Been in the field for 30 odd years, and I hope to talk about extractive venture capital at some point during this panel and play that role. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Bennet Zelner. I'm in the field because I'm interested in the potential of psychedelics to help foster systems change. And actually to your comment, Henrik, about the possibility of psychedelics influencing leadership, I'm doing research right now on the effects of psychedelic experiences on decision-making by organizational leaders, which I'll be speaking about at 3 if you want to come. So, so I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll pass it on to Anne.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Philippi. I'm in the field because I experienced, first of all, tremendous healing because of psychedelics. And second, because I think I can't think of a more exciting industry space to be in. And I have a podcast called The New Health Club, and we're just in a process of building a media company, the first psychedelic media company out of Amsterdam, where I'm also going to move.
Hi, I'm Tadeusz Hawrot. I'm the founder and the executive director of Psychedelic Access and Research European Alliance, PAREA for short. And I will definitely speak to the excitement. I'm here because of the scale of unmet medical needs in the area of mental health conditions. And I'm excited about the prospects that psychedelics are bringing. So in terms of not just relieving the symptoms, but really getting us to the root of our mental health problems.
I'm Kaitlin Roberson, and I also care about root causes. So I formed a company in the psychedelic space that is trying to address the trauma that drives chronic pain. And I got interested in that after a career in the humanitarian field and working with the refugee population. And in the psychedelic space, I heard a lot about the veteran community and PTSD and in healing their PTSD with psychedelics. And I thought, who else is wounded by war? And what can I do about it? And so, yeah, we're excited to be addressing chronic pain and that being our sole focus at Cacti Therapeutics.
I'm Stefan Beiten. I'm by training a lawyer, historian, and by doing a serial entrepreneur who can concentrate. And I'm in this field because I had to learn the hard way once that there is no outer development without the inner to hold it. And my inner was about stuck at maybe a 12-year-old in a man's body. So, and that's been an interesting journey to grow that one.
So, first question. There's a Simon and Garfunkel song, there must be 50 ways to leave your lover. So how many ways are there to finance psychedelic businesses and the success of this endeavor to bring psychedelic therapies into the world?
I will. All right. So clearly there are many options, but the issue with a lot of conventional financing options for psychedelics is that they embody the same extractive economic patterns that are at the root of a great deal of mental distress in the first place. So they're the wrong container. And there's a very, that's not just like a philosophical comment. There's a very practical level to that too. I don't think that, I think the delivery of psychedelics is not just about the molecules, it's about the therapy as well. And it's not a high margin business, in my view, that's going to generate the types of returns, these kind of unicorn returns that conventional investors are looking for. So I think we need to be looking, I think the psychedelic field is a place where we can explore and experiment with alternative forms of financing that kind of hybrid financing is what I would call these forms, that combine features of conventional financing with more purpose-driven kinds of structures. So I could say a lot more about that. I don't want to take up too much time right now. So I hope to get into that more, but I'll leave it there for now.
So is there somebody contradicting that position? Obviously, Bennet is related to a company that is a non-profit, that is trying to do that, to bring molecules into the market in a non-proprietary, non-patent way.
Well,
so is there somebody in the panel who would say, this is not possible?
It's not that I would say that it's not possible, but I think that we have to work within the structures that be. And I worked in the nonprofit sector most of my career, and I chose a for-profit structure now because I believe that it is the most efficient path to greater access. And it's about just being really practical and working with what we have. And so patents are the structure that we have right now to develop drugs in the U.S. And I don't think that they're going to go away in our lifetime. Maybe someday, but yeah, I can be very, utopian in my thinking, but then there's the practical of how to get a drug to market.
Yes. So regarding who can finance this field, so I don't have a business background, but I work in policy and regulation, and for me, it's only natural that we should see more funds coming to psychedelic science from the state. The federal funding in the US and in the EU, it's the EU funds. We have Horizon Europe, which has 100 billion euros spread over 7 years going for scientific research. So that's one idea, and I'm very pleased to say unofficially, because the announcement will be made in a few months only, but there will be a major EU-funded project looking at supporting clinical trials in palliative care setting, funded by the EU. And I also want to mention that when it comes to funding, it's not just about money going directly to research. We also need supportive regulatory environment. We need to incentivize innovation in mental health, and we can do it through state incentives. At the moment, there is a major revision of the EU pharma strategy in the EU, and for instance, on top of already existing incentives in pediatric medicines and rare diseases, they are now going to incentivize antimicrobials. And we need to do the same with mental health treatments and with novel mental health treatments. We need to recognize the urgency and the huge scale of unmet needs and provide adequate incentives.
But is that a state against capital, or are you thinking about a combination model? Is the role of the state funding startups and then investors will take over? What's in your mind?
So in Europe, we are good with early development of startups. So there are appropriate funds, ERC, European Research Council, and others. So that's very important. What we are not so good with is throwing more capital at later stages. And there are a lot of discussions now at the EU level about different instruments like bonds. I'm not an expert here, but I just want to mention that there is this recognition, and I think that it's a systemic issue that is not just relevant to psychedelics, but to the whole ecosystem in Europe, and something that we Europeans should be working on.
Is that a difference? Is there a difference between the US situation and the European situation?
Well, yes, there is a difference because, as we know, the majority of clinical trials are happening now in the US when it comes to psychedelics. And it does worry me that while in the US it's quite likely that we'll see the approval of the first psychedelic medicine, MDMA, for PTSD likely next year, in Europe we might wait perhaps 5-6 more years. I don't really know. The more I am in this field, the more uncertain I am when we will see any psychedelic assisted therapy approved in Europe. So that's one example of a difference. There are, of course, many more.
So the next one is directed to all of you. Will an investor-based strategy of developing these molecules lead to a certain outcome that would, for example, not put so much focus on psychotherapies or on the environment, or is it not the case? What do you think? Maybe Simeon.
Yeah, I think there's certainly that concern. And to go back to the previous question, I kind of see 3.5 buckets of how businesses and or this movement gets funded. Government, we've already discussed that. Philanthropy, or the nonprofit side. Just the pure play, whether it's private equity or venture capital. And then what happens, which is still the majority of the space, which is everything happening in the underground, which is a commerce-based cash incentive system, and it's been happening since the beginning of time. So within those 4 buckets, as it relates to how companies will get funded and the provisions therein where profit is often put over patient, we're at the beginning of a time where we need to be very careful and tactful of how this rolls out, both the psychotherapy, both the new drugs, both the old drugs. And yeah, to the earlier point too, there's a great contention where most of us are used to getting a pill from a doctor, and you're seeing a lot of startups move towards that model because it's easy to get reimbursed. It's something we're familiar with. It's easy to get funded. You can show ROI, et cetera, et cetera. But it's still the very beginning of how this will play out.
What does it mean that it's the very beginning of how this will play out? Are there energies and structures in the field that will be self-regulating, or what is your thinking?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I mean, there's to some extent, one might argue there's a great level of self-regulation. I mean, by a show of non-hands, who here has done a psychedelic? If you have, don't raise your hand. And how many did that under a framework of a regulated model? By a show of non-hands. So it's already existed, right? How will that play out as money comes in, as governments, as the data shows that there is this opportunity for greater efficacy within a system, whether it's the old and tried system with reimbursement and going to your physician, et cetera, regardless of what the indication is, or a new one. So another question is, how many approved psychedelics exist in any jurisdiction? And that number is pretty low. So that's why I say it's the beginning, because we're not sure how the next decade or several decades will play out around these molecules.
I'm not exactly convinced when you say that this is a self-regulating system. In how far is the use of illegal substances by people self-regulating so that it brings more quality to the system, or would push the system away from simple use of substances to a more integrative system of building the environments for the use so that sustainable effects can occur? Is the underground, I don't understand why the underground would play a role in that.
I think there's a panel later built on the shoulders of, or at least that's the title. So a lot of people are looking at this as new, and it's new in the sense of we're creating new regulatory frameworks. We're getting new data. We're creating new policies around these medicines. We're figuring out how to get insurance to reimburse it. But we know that whether it's the last, at least in my lifetime, of how people have found healing, it hasn't been from the traditional routes. It's been from the underground, or dating back millennia, indigenous cultures, where so much of the new companies are looking to the old. First, in the last 50 years, there's a joke internally. It's like whenever we see a new clinical trial, we can go to Arrowwood or somewhere else and go, oh yeah, well, that was being tried 13 years ago. Now let's find the IP, now let's find the patents, now let's work with the powers that be to make it real. And even before that, let's go back to, I flew in from remote Norway, where I was looking at this very interesting molecular base that they were able to track both with Amanita and some herbs that only grow in remote Norway, dating back to 1500. And the discussion was, how do we commercialize this? So that's kind of my point. And we already have a lot of intelligence. Now we're trying to figure out how to commercialize that or get it out there. And the most traditional method of medicine is in biotech and pharmaceuticals, et cetera. So that's my point. Does that make sense? Okay.
But I mean, there's also like
Yeah.
just because this fits very well. I feel doing the podcast also that you can see that other industries like media industry, like you want to say like the biggest industries is the wellness industry, is kind of starting to approach this topic. Everybody has a very different way of approaching it. But I mean, also the cannabis industry is suddenly coming to you saying, whoa, this is also psychedelics. Shouldn't we do something together? So, and just in terms of coming back to how to get money, let's say for a podcast, what I'm actively doing right now, for example, is reaching out to various industries in the vicinity, how they are starting to be interested in this. And I don't talk to any psychedelic VC right now. And it turns out it's a really good idea for now, because there's a step in between that has to happen almost, like that a bigger kind of audience or target group, however you want to call it, needs to get accustomed with the idea that something is out there like that. And I think then you should go back to I mean, in my case, to legit psychedelic VCs again, but there's something in between that's happening.
I'm going to just add, thank you. I want to add to Simeon's comments. So I fully agree that this kind of trade-off between, or this conflict between patients and profits is a real issue with traditional financing mechanisms. So I would add another bucket to your list of buckets. And the bucket I would add is the not-for-profit sector. And by that, I don't just mean philanthropically funded nonprofits, although it includes those. It also includes government enterprises. It also includes cooperatives, and it includes foundation-owned companies. And it's not that these entities are failing to generate economic returns. They sell goods and services. They're generating returns. The difference is that they have structures that don't extract those returns, accumulate them, and then extract them to shareholders. Instead, they have structures that not only allow them to, but require them to reinvest the returns into a purpose, into a stated purpose. And this type of structure is not new. Like, we're here in Germany. This is Zeiss's structure. Right? So I think when I mentioned hybrid structures before, I think exploring and experimenting with these types of hybrid structures is a very viable strategy. And frankly, this is what USONA has done too with its medical research organization structure in the US. It's a variant of that.
And I would just add to that too. I completely agree that we have to look for these creative, avenues, especially in the early stages, especially when there's a lot of R&D to do and a lot of discovery work. And I think that the psychedelic space has not fully taken advantage of the grants. There's a lot of NIH grants. I know at least in the pain space, the HEAL initiative is deploying $500 million a year trying to find novel non-opioid pain solutions. And a lot of the psychedelic companies that emerged, in the late teens, in the last, 5 years or so, they didn't take the time to write grants. And a company can, in the early stages, take a molecule, an asset, all the way through IND enabling work, non-dilutive grant funding. And that's a brilliant strategy, to de-risk. And
This is where we also seem to find a difference between Europe and some of North America. So just addressing Stefan, so do you think that there's a difference between how high capital need businesses are financed in the United States and in Europe? Do all the Europeans have to go to the United States to get funded?
Well, the risk mindset is a completely different one in the U.S. I used to be in the space of film finance for a long time, and I remember one time I was offered the CGI rights to a comic book company that just went bust, but that was in 1997, and those rights did not exist. I said, what am I paying for? Lo and behold, it was bought for $1 million. Later on, it was sold for $5 billion to Disney. It was called Marvel. That would have never happened in Europe. So you would not have found someone to pay $1 million for a theoretical legal right that doesn't exist. Nevertheless, I mean, we learn here, and we become more creative. But especially in that space, there is so much uses and cross-border usages that to think of future usage models and put them into single-purpose vehicles, space that I come from, and then float them with high-risk capital to then go and combine it with exactly what you talk about, that's definitely doable. Just the space is not large enough yet to be interesting for those kind of hybrid models, but it will be. It's actually getting there.
Some of you are in the field and also looking for money or for many years or are overseeing how that works. So how did the financing structures and the opportunities change? And of course, that also relates to the bubble. Did it burst? Is it still bursting? Which state are we in?
Oh, to be honest, this is now my third big crisis in my life. The 2000, each one actually almost wiped me out. 2001, .com go bye-bye, media bye-bye, VC in Europe didn't exist from one day to the next. Nevertheless, the money that was poured into the .com era, that didn't just disappear. Now it was just not in organizations, it was in people. And those people then found each other again through small initiatives, had great ideas, and had a head start. So basically the development was paid by, well, NASDAQ in Germany was Neue Markt. And all of a sudden you had this immensely quick road to, well, what is now the tech scene. I mean, I was involved in a company that in 1999 claimed to put digital maps on phones. It was 7 times bankrupt. And in 2006, we sold it to Nokia and became Nokia Maps, and the first billion-dollar company in Berlin, and basically created the Berlin tech scene. But that's what you have to go through sometimes. And it pivoted, I don't know how many times. And it just reassembled all the knowledge from the .com bust.
This is macroeconomic development over the last 20 years. And if we zoom in into the psychedelic renaissance phase, what has happened?
I just want to say that you point out, there is tremendous opportunity in down markets to build something really successful. A lot of the, really successful companies came out of a really difficult time, economically. So there's hope there. To your question, there was a lot of capital thrown at the psychedelic industry, early on. And now it is much harder to come by. The funds in this space are very conservative in their investment. And they also require a level of due diligence that they didn't require a few years ago. And so I've definitely found it challenging to fundraise in this environment. And that has forced me to look to the grant funding and other creative, solutions.
And Kaitlin, is this an internal process in the psychedelic investment sphere? Does it have to do with the stage of development of psychedelic therapies and molecules, or is it more the macroeconomic atmosphere that is driving the change?
It's probably a combination of both macro and micro forces. There's a lot of companies that didn't fully understand the drug development process. There was a lot of spillover from the cannabis industry that was looking for something more like a formulation play, a different delivery method, but not traditional small molecule drug development in biotech. And so they were looking for something that they could develop and sell in a more of a dispensary model, which would require a regulated, framework where, we have states that would allow that, and that's not happening as quickly as people want it to happen. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of pivoting and adapting and also understanding the amount of capital that's required to actually develop a new chemical entity.
I just thought also it was interesting what happened to field trip and synthesis, who were like synthesis was the gold standard and this is where you would go, and you never thought it would ever go away. And
Gold standard for
a retreat, like for where you, if people would ask you where should I go in Europe, you would say I would say without hesitation, go to synthesis, and it was really great. And then suddenly, still people trying to understand what actually has happened there, and I find it interesting that when this happened, that they announced shutting down, folding, it was a really emotional moment for a lot of people, saying like, oh my God, if those guys are not even, like, say, be able to do that, how's this even being in the future? And I found it interesting that it was the first time in this industry that people were really being like, I feel like something just hit me. It was a really emotional statement that a lot of people did, and I thought it was really great that there was something like this coming up because of just a company closing, kind of.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think the situations certainly had some differences between synthesis and field trip, but at one level, I'll just focus on field trip for a moment. The issue, I think field trip demonstrates the issue that I raised earlier and that I think Simeon was pointing to also, which is, so field trip is publicly traded, and in the business of delivering psychedelic therapy, you cannot generate the types of returns that traditional venture finance and also public markets have come to expect. So, yeah, and I don't want to go into synthesis, but I think there's some evidence of some similar. I think part of the story there was some of the incompatibility between a subset of extractive investors and, again, this model that is inherently not a high margin model. So I think this is actually very healthy that we're seeing this kind of clearing out right now. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a regenerative economist, and if we look at natural systems, if we look at forests, there are forest fires, and it creates the way for new, healthier growth. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think this is creating an opportunity and an incentive, as you were pointing to really explore structures that are truly aligned, that are truly compatible with this kind of revolutionary, at least in our culture, this revolutionary therapy.
And I will say there are a lot of assets in the psychedelic drug development space that are sitting, waiting for development, and companies that have run out of cash and will fold, and those assets will be available to be licensed by experienced teams. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
And I'll just add, so we are, speaking a lot about the drug development, but again, we know that we like to believe that it's not the drug here that is the cure, but I think we are only beginning to grapple with how to kind of insert the therapy part to all this. And I think what's important to understand is that mental health problems are not equivalent to physical medical conditions, because they can be viewed as problems of societies, as problems of communities. And when we think about these treatments, they should be, we what really matters to the healing experience is what, for me, is what happens after the drug wears out. And the question is how we can go beyond just the drug development and look at engaging communities, tapping into peer support networks, building this wider network that we don't now perhaps have sufficiently in the underground model. So this is really something that keeps me engaged, and Parea really is here to ensure the optimal safety and also care for patients, for participants, and this therapeutic component is very important in our view.
Let me talk quickly about one of the elephants in the room. I'm always looking for elephants in the room. So when I was asking Anne the standard for what with the synthesis, you said retreats. So one of the elephants in the room certainly is, are we calling people who are looking for self-experience, self-development patients? Or is it two markets? Are we actually talking about two markets? Or are these two markets that are like have a development into each other? I mean, there is some kind of not talking about these two markets probably. So, yeah.
Even just to say, in Europe, we still use the word patient a lot in more traditional sense, but globally, there is more and more tendencies of using terms like people with lived experience, because the word patient is also quite kind of reductionist. But that's just on the side, because your question was, of course, about the kind of medical framework and non-medical use. So I'll leave others to answer that.
Yeah, but let's, who would want to leave the medical framework behind, completely behind it? How would that then look? And then let's come back to the money.
Well, I think there is a trend to get away from
Yeah.
pathologizing everything, and making, looking at ourselves as sick instead of a more, empowered, empowered framework for looking at our health. And I think with psychedelics, there's multiple markets, because you have the mental health markets, there's pain. Pain is a market that's twice the size of mental health and has a huge global economic burden, as well as mental health. And with psychedelics, what's unique is, they can be like, there's the whole realm of neurotropics and just like supplements that enhance our mental sharpness and longevity and just overall health and wellness. To your point about the global wellness industry, that's a huge, industry. So we're not talking just about sick people with psychedelics.
But I feel also it's kind of, what I see is that the differentiation becomes less and less between patient and retreat interested, for example, because a lot of people that are, let's say, in their 30s, they already see how this could prevent them from being depressed in 20 years along the line. They might be even seeing it in their parents that they never did anything for their mental health. So I feel at one point, it's almost like a preventional situation that one could look into.
Just an elephant in the room. Isn't that a fantasy of middle-class people in rich Western countries who can afford to travel to Portugal, the Netherlands, Jamaica? So is that really true if we look at societies as a whole and the global perspective? So and even if you would say no, it's not just a middle-class fantasy. So you would have to tell us how this is going to be being implemented in our high class or highly scientifically coined and structured societies that have procedures how to implement drugs and how to care for their safety. So even the spectrum from defining a person sick or self-defining a sick to being somebody in self-development that needs to be societally regulated. Somebody has to make a law or convince others, no, we are not sick anymore, we are just developing. Yeah. So this needs to be organized.
Yeah. And that's
I think Stefan first. And then,
Yeah. Well,
sorry.
I believe now you're touching upon a very, well, that's a rabbit hole that goes really deep, and I think it needs to be explored. The rabbit hole is the sociological context. Do we actually have the sociological structure means to hold the space for these kind of experiences? When you look back to the Greeks, I mean, for thousands of years, the mysteries, the illusion rites, were kept a mystery, were kept a secret in the hands of a few families only. It was even under death penalty that it was taken to the private space outside of those organized rites. At the same time, was an integral part of society. They had the DNA. They didn't have our promise, where in the last 300 years, we're basically been building our societies on a false promise, which is we can have absolute freedom and absolute security at the same time. So every time a crisis hits, we go like, oh my God, I thought I was promised absolute security, and the other way around. They had a 9-to-3 solution, 9 months of Apollo, structure, order, balance, and then he goes officially on vacation, hands over to his brother Dionysus, god of positive disruption, not destruction, and for 3 months, hey, we can have Burning Man meets Oktoberfest meets Carnival, and it's official. So they understood that from a sociological perspective, it needs to be woven into the DNA of society. We do not have that in our still very monotheistic, Christian-based belief system, and the blueprint of our societies is based on that. So if we really want to bring it into the preventive space and basically be able to offer at a party, you want a cocktail, you want psilocybin, you want this, there's a long way to go, and it needs to start at the top. I believe even going from a religion of having to a religion of being, and now we're really talking back to the 4th century.
Bennet? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to note that there are alternatives that are being explored. So in the US, there's been decriminalization in 2 states now, Oregon and California. And in Oregon, which is a little bit, Colorado, thank you. In Oregon, which is a little bit farther along, and this kind of goes to your point a bit, there's been the way the law works is a lot of the authority is devolved to the community level. And that's critical because we do need to create the types of community structures to support psychedelic experiences. We don't have them as an indigenous part of our Western culture. But that doesn't mean that we should just, in my opinion, that we should only deliver psychedelics to the medical establishment. The issue is community. So community is the medicine, and psychedelics are a tool to help us, to help us use that medicine to its fullest potential.
And I just want to mention that I think OECD, the Organization of Europe of Economic Cooperation and Development, estimates that at some point in our lives, half of humans are affected by mental health conditions. So this really shows that it's a problem of all of us, and mental health. We are not either mentally health or ill, because the mental health exists on this complex spectrum from the states of great suffering to, to the optimal well-being. So it's not just about the absence and presence of the disorder. But when it comes to the implementation and structures, I want to offer an analogy maybe, and that is that of stroke care, because psychedelics are a multimodal therapy, and it requires engagement of multidisciplinary teams and so on. And so stroke, because when we have stroke units in many countries, which are dedicated to the acute care of stroke, surgery and so on, and then the rehabilitation. And they are staffed by multidisciplinary teams of healthcare professionals that are trained in rehabilitation in different modalities, like occupational therapy, cognitive therapy, and so on. And what happened, so what's really important is that the stroke rehabilitation, which is very costly, by the way, so the estimates show in Germany, for instance, the annual costs of rehabilitation per patient is around maybe 40,000. In the US, it's $60,000. The mean for the developed countries is 27. And it's not just 1 year costs, but these structures developed first because there was evidence that this model works. And secondly, because stroke rehabilitation gained prominence because it was recognized as a significant public health issue. And we need mental health conditions to be recognized as significant public health issue, and then we can really make progress. Without that, it will be difficult, I think.
Just echoing a few things people have said. First, psychedelics could be, the healing of sickness, one polarity, or the optimization of wellness. And we see it through those landscapes. And, being at the helm of seeing every idea and every model makes me want to reflect on Bennet's metaphor of the forest, right? There's so much smoke right now. There's been a lot of burning, and there's so much smoke. And it's very exciting to see what will come out of it. And no one's exactly sure how it'll come out, but I know at the beginning of this decade, we hosted, I guess officially, the world's first psychedelic investment conference. And it's private, but we had the head of the founder of Decriminalized Nature and the first company to get listed on the NASDAQ. And they're both in the room, and one was like, is decriminalization the way, or is this FDA medicalized approvals the way? And in the room, it was both ways. And that's why you're seeing, this progress in Colorado, in Oregon, great news out of California this morning, Massachusetts. Again, that's very US-centric, but it's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be both. One might seem like it's ahead this year, and then it's behind 1 year, but it's going to be all of the above, and it's up to us to steward and kind of move the needle on what's most effective for how we exist in society as citizens at this time. Unless, of course, the AI overlords take over and our species stops existing in a few years anyway.
Which could happen, So now we're running warm. We could go on for another hour, but we're already at the end of the panel. And now comes a playful one that I would like every one of you to answer. The first one is a little bit more under stress than the other one. So if you had $1 billion, let's say euros, €1 billion at your free disposal, and wanted to invest in the market. So let's read it. Would you invest in patients or patents, or would you invest in therapies or molecules?
Well, we don't have $1 billion under management yet, but we're investing in everything at this point. So we're
Is that an answer? Is that an answer?
In the psychotherapists and training, and we're investing in drug companies and everything in between.
So you're investing in infrastructure?
We haven't done a lot of real estate or retreats or clinics, but definitely the training of psychotherapists and some of the leading companies there. And then the other side, the more traditional, where the majority of the capital, the $3 billion or so has gone. And again, that's not a lot of money, which is why it's still early and still smoky, but the majority has gone into drug development and discovery.
So Bennet, where would your $1 billion euros go?
The first chunk of it would actually go to my research project. Yeah, but after that, I'm totally on board with the infrastructure point. We already have some great molecules, and no doubt there's room for additional ones. But the real bottleneck is the infrastructure. And so we need infrastructure. We need trained therapists. We need infrastructure for delivery modes, and we need infrastructure to support businesses and to support organizations that don't want to use traditional venture finance, infrastructural resources to support these kind of hybrid forms that I was talking about earlier.
I would also invest in the infrastructure, and I would build the CNN of psychedelics.
So I would invest in a locally adapted community integrational models, tapping into services like social, educational, cultural, and so on, and trying to bridge, because there is so much that exists already. And obviously in the psychedelics, we're a new field. We don't have these structures, so I would be trying to connect psychedelic integration with already existing services. And take some commission to Parea as well, for Parea.
To your point earlier about the social factors, yeah, the biopsychosocial model of pain, we need so much more investment in. It would be more infrastructure. We already don't have enough social workers in the US, and now we're trying to train social workers as psychedelic assisted psychotherapists. But that field has long been way understaffed, because I worked in the humanitarian field, which is mostly social workers, And so to think that now we're going to have enough social workers for psychedelic assisted therapy. So yeah, community-based care models, I would definitely invest in that. And then of course, I'm terribly excited about pain drug development because we lost over 100,000 people to the opioid crisis last year in the US. We're desperate for pain solutions that work. So that's where I would put my money.
I couldn't agree more. For me, it's the combination of you said and you, which is kind of a Y Combinator, if you're familiar with the text-based model, and spread it as far as possible and connect the two worlds. And because at the end of the day, what we're doing, we're changing the conversation of society, and that needs both fields. And that also needs good infrastructure to hold the space. So you never know where it comes from. Also, Y Combinator with, I don't know, 500 investments, they only make it because of 3 successes. Airbnb, Dropbox, third one I forgot. And that will be the same thing here. It's a numbers game.
Thank you, everybody, for your answers, for your ideas. I learned a lot, and thank you for attending. Yeah.